Right now, someone is reading you. Not your words, not your resume, not the version of yourself you've carefully constructed and presented to the world. You, your fears, your desires, your blind spots, the things you think you hide, they don't hide. Not to the right kind of mind. And the terrifying truth is this. You have almost certainly already been in a room with someone who possesses this kind of intelligence. You didn't recognize them. You never do. That's the point. They watched how you responded when you were interrupted. They clocked the micro-hesitation before you answered a question you weren't prepared for. They noted what made you laugh too quickly, agree too easily, or defend yourself too loudly. And by the time you left that room, that meeting, that dinner, all that negotiation, they already knew 3 things about you that you didn't know about yourself. This is not paranoia. This is the operating reality of dangerously intelligent people. Most people go through life assuming that intelligence is a measure of what you know. Degrees, facts, data. They believe the smartest person in the room is the one who talks the most, explains the fastest, or knows the most technical information. This is one of the most exploitable misconceptions in human social behavior. And if you hold this belief, you are not just wrong. You are prey. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. He wrote about it in language so honest, so ruthless, that the Catholic Church wanted it banned. The Prince wasn't a guide to cruelty, it was a manual for reality. A cold, precise dissection of how power actually moves. Not how we wish it would, not how morality textbooks say it should, but how it does. The intelligence Machiavelli described wasn't loud. It wasn't academic. It was observational, adaptive, patient, and deeply rooted in an understanding of human nature that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Because to understand human nature at that level, you first have to be honest about your own. Here is what this video is and what it is not. This is not a self-help script. There are no affirmations here. No believe in yourself frameworks. What you are about to receive is a breakdown of 8 cognitive and behavioral qualities that separate those who are merely intelligent from those who are dangerously so. These are the qualities that close deals before they're formally opened. That end conflicts before they escalate. That build influence so quietly, so deliberately, that those being influenced often believe the idea was their own. You need to know these. Not because the world is full of villains, but because the world is full of people who are using these principles, consciously or not, and if you are not fluent in this language, you are reading a conversation you don't understand. If you are new here, this channel, Mastering Influence, exists for one reason: to arm you. Subscribe now, not as a courtesy, as a strategic decision, because what you're about to learn doesn't end with this video, and you cannot afford to be one step behind. The knowledge starts now. Before we go deep, you need to understand what's at stake if you close this video in the next 3 minutes. Not metaphorically, concretely. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called unconscious competence, the stage where a skill becomes so internalized, so automatic, that you no longer need to think about it. The people we're discussing today have reached this stage with social and psychological leverage. They don't consciously think, I will now use strategic patience. They simply are patient. They don't decide to manage perception in real time. Perception management is their default mode of operating. What this means for you is that you are not fighting against someone making deliberate moves. You are fighting against someone whose entire cognitive architecture has been restructured around influence. And here is the cost of ignorance. If you don't understand emotional detachment, you will always be the most emotional person in any conflict, which means you will always lose. If you don't understand strategic patience, you will rush into moves that give your position away. If you don't understand how perception is manufactured, you will believe the narrative you're being fed and make decisions based on a fiction someone else constructed for you. Multiply this across your career, your relationships, your finances, your reputation. The people operating with these 8 qualities are not always your enemies, but they are always ahead of you, until now. At the end of this video, we reveal what Machiavelli considered the single most dangerous quality of all, the one that functions as the foundation beneath every other. Without it, the other 7 collapse. With it, even average intelligence becomes formidable. We are calling it the Keystone Principle, and everything in this video is building toward it. Stay with this. Every section compounds. Let's begin with the first quality, and let's be precise about what it actually means. Emotional detachment is not coldness. It is not sociopathy. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the disciplined refusal to let feeling become decision. Here is the distinction that most people miss. Emotions are data. When you feel threatened, that's information about a situation. When you feel attraction, that's information about a person. When you feel resentment, that's information about a boundary that's been crossed. Emotions are extraordinarily useful signals. When read correctly, they are some of the most precise intelligence your mind can generate. The problem is that most people don't read their emotions. They become them. A negotiator who feels disrespected and reacts to that disrespect has just handed their opponent a weapon. A leader who feels anxious and communicates that anxiety has just destabilized their entire team. A strategist who feels impatient and moves early has just revealed their hand before the board is set. Dangerously intelligent people feel all of these things. The difference is the gap, the microsecond of cognitive space between stimulus and response, that they have trained to be wide enough to make a choice inside. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn to be both the lion and the fox. The lion uses force. The fox uses cunning. But neither animal acts on mere emotion. The lion attacks when it has advantage. The fox maneuvers when direct confrontation would be fatal. Emotion is present, but it is channeled, and not obeyed. In modern cognitive science, this is referred to as affect regulation, the executive function that governs how we process and respond to emotional states. Research in neuroscience, particularly work following the foundational studies of Antonio Damasio, has shown that complete absence of emotion actually impairs decision-making. The goal is not zero emotion. The goal is non-reactivity, emotion informing the decision without controlling it. Now combine this with the second quality, strategic patience. This is perhaps the most underestimated weapon in the entire Machiavellian arsenal, because it runs directly counter to every instinct modern culture has reinforced in us. We live in a world engineered for immediacy. Notifications, instant results, overnight success stories. The dopamine architecture of modern life has been deliberately designed to make waiting feel like failure. Dangerously smart individuals have deprogrammed this conditioning. They understand that timing is not passive. Waiting is not weakness. It is positioning. Consider how a chess grandmaster operates. They are not simply responding to your moves. They are managing a structure of possibilities 5, 6, 10 moves ahead. Sometimes the most powerful thing a grandmaster does is nothing visible. They make a move that looks inconsequential, repositioning a minor piece, creating space, securing a flank, and the opponent, seeing no immediate threat, relaxes. That relaxation is the trap. Strategic patience functions the same way in human affairs. A person who has been wronged and says nothing, not because they've forgotten, but because the moment to respond hasn't arrived, is infinitely more dangerous than someone who retaliates immediately. Immediate retaliation is readable. Delayed, precise response from a position of strength is destabilizing. The Roman general Fabius Maximus was nicknamed the Delayer by his own troops, initially as an insult. He refused to engage Hannibal's army directly, despite political pressure, public ridicule, and the humiliation of watching the enemy ravage the Italian countryside. He waited. He understood that Hannibal's supply lines were his vulnerability, and that time was his weapon. Eventually, the strategy worked. Hannibal, starved of resources, was neutralized, not by a single decisive battle, but by the accumulated pressure of strategic patience. Your opponents expect you to react. The moment you stop being predictable, the moment you introduce time and silence as weapons, you fundamentally alter the psychological dynamic of any conflict or negotiation. Here is the question I need you to sit with, and I want you to answer it in the comments, because your answer will tell you exactly how much of this you need. Think about the last time you lost. Not a game. A real loss. A deal that fell through. A relationship that collapsed. An opportunity that slipped away. Now ask yourself, did you move too fast? Did you show your hand before you needed to? Did you react emotionally in a moment that required calculation? Did someone else's patience outlast yours? Most people, when they answer honestly, will say yes. And that single admission is worth more than any strategy I can give you. Because it confirms that this is not theoretical. You have already paid the price for not having these qualities. The only question is whether you continue to pay it. Now let me show you these principles operating in the real world. Not in a boardroom, not in a war room, but in a situation that is achingly, uncomfortably human. Consider the dynamics of a corporate promotion cycle. Two candidates. Let's call them Marcus and Daniel. Marcus is gifted, vocal. He presents confidently, generates ideas in meetings, and is universally recognized as talented. He is also visibly ambitious, which he believes is an asset. He pushes. He advocates loudly for himself. When he's passed over for a project, he says something. When his ideas are attributed to someone else, he corrects the record immediately, publicly. Daniel does almost none of this. He speaks less in meetings, but when he speaks, what he says lands differently, because it's rare. He studies the decision makers. He understands what each one values, what each one fears, what political dynamics exist between them. He positions his contributions to solve their problems, not to demonstrate his brilliance. He builds relationships with people 3 levels above him without appearing to. He never confronts directly. He maneuvers. 12 months later, Daniel is promoted. Marcus is talented, but Marcus is readable, and in environments where power is the true currency, readable is vulnerable. I want you to meet someone. His name doesn't matter. What matters is that you recognize him. He was 34 years old when it began to unravel. Not dramatically, not in a single catastrophic event. That's the thing about failing without these psychological tools. It rarely looks like an explosion. It looks like a slow, almost imperceptible erosion. Like shoreline disappearing under a tide you never noticed rising. He was the kind of person who called himself transparent. He said it like it was a virtue. I'm an open book. What you see is what you get. I don't play games. And he meant it, genuinely, without irony. He wore his emotions on his face, his ambitions in his words, his insecurities in his defensiveness. He believed that authenticity would protect him. It did not. The first casualty was a business partnership. He had an idea, a genuine, valuable idea, and he shared it too early with the wrong person. Not a villain, just someone who understood, intuitively, that information is leverage. And who moved on that information before he was ready? He never saw it coming. How could he? He had no model for this behavior. In his world, you shared ideas because collaboration was good and trust was the currency of relationships. He felt betrayed, and he said so. Loudly, to mutual contacts. He framed the other person as dishonest, which, by his moral framework, was accurate. But the way he handled it, the visible anger, the emotional public accounting, the need to be seen as the wrong party, it cost him more than the original loss. He became, in the perception of the professional network around him, someone who couldn't handle adversity, someone volatile, someone risky to associate with. The perception was now the reality, and he had no tools to manage perception. The second casualty was a relationship. He fell deeply in love with someone who was, to use a clinical term, emotionally avoidant. The psychology was predictable to any outside observer. She withdrew when he pursued. She returned when he created distance. And the entire dynamic operated on a subconscious push-pull mechanism that he was completely unable to read, let alone navigate. He did what he always did. He was transparent. He told her how he felt. Repeatedly. With increasing intensity, as though volume and frequency would create the certainty he craved. He had no understanding of the role scarcity plays in desire. No understanding that revealing everything is a form of giving power away. No grasp of restraint as a seductive, stabilizing force. She left. He spiraled. Not into depression, though there was that. Into analysis. He obsessed over what he'd done wrong. Reconstructing conversations, rewriting moments. But his analysis was always emotional, never strategic. He asked, why did she stop loving me, instead of what psychological dynamics were in play, and how could I have influenced them differently? The first question has no useful answer. The second one does. The third casualty was the deepest. By his mid-30s, he was objectively capable, educated, hardworking. But he had been passed over so many times, in business, in romance, in social hierarchies, that he had begun to construct a story about himself, that the world was unfair, that others succeeded through luck or corruption or connections he didn't have access to. This story was not entirely wrong. The world is unfair. Others do succeed through corrupt means. But the story was also a cage, because it removed his agency. It made him a spectator of a game he didn't understand, rather than a student of rules he could learn. And this is the true darkness of not having these qualities. It is not that you get manipulated occasionally. It is that over time, without the frameworks to understand what's happening to you and around you, you construct a narrative of victimhood or helplessness that becomes self-fulfilling. You stop trying to understand the game. You start resenting it. And resentment is perhaps the least powerful place from which to operate. He never learned the 8 qualities. Or rather, he learned them too late, after the compound losses had already calcified into identity. Don't be him. Now we go deep, because everything up to this point has been preparation. Let's move through the remaining qualities with the precision they deserve. Quality 3. Mastery of perception. Reality is almost irrelevant. What people believe about reality, that is the lever. This sounds cynical. It is actually just accurate. Human beings do not experience the world directly. We experience our interpretation of the world, filtered through cognitive biases, prior experiences, emotional states, and social narratives. What this means practically is that 2 people can observe the exact same event and construct completely different realities from it. Dangerously intelligent people understand this not as a philosophical curiosity, but as an operational fact. They know that how they are perceived, their competence, their status, their intentions, is not determined solely by what they do, but by how what they do is framed, contextualized, and witnessed. This is why Julius Caesar was meticulous about his public image, even during military campaigns. Why Lincoln carefully managed the political narrative around the Emancipation Proclamation's timing. Why Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day. A deliberate removal of any variable that might distract from the singular perception he wanted to project. Controlling perception is not lying. It is curating. It is understanding that every interaction generates a story in someone else's mind, and choosing to influence what that story says. The practical application, before any high-stakes interaction, ask yourself, what do I want this person to believe about me, about this situation, about what's possible? Then reverse engineer the signals, the framing, the environment, and the language that creates that belief. Quality 4. Adaptability. Rigid strategies are monuments to past thinking. The situation changes. The board shifts. The opponent moves in a direction you didn't anticipate. The dangerously smart individual does not mourn the obsolete plan. They release it without sentimentality and recalibrate. This is not inconsistency. It is higher-order consistency, staying true to the ultimate objective while being completely fluid about the method. Napoleon's early military genius was rooted in adaptability. His core system allowed for rapid, modular tactical changes that rigid traditional armies simply couldn't respond to in time. When his adaptability calcified in later campaigns, when he began repeating strategies that had worked before, in situations that had fundamentally changed, the losses followed. The lesson is not just to be adaptable. It is to never mistake a successful tactic for a permanent strategy. Quality 5. Deep understanding of human nature. Every person you encounter is being driven by a relatively small set of core psychological forces. The need for status, the fear of loss, the desire for connection, the need for certainty, the hunger for significance. These forces operate largely below conscious awareness, which means most people cannot accurately describe why they want what they want or fear what they fear. You can. When you understand that someone's aggressive negotiating position is rooted in fear of appearing weak rather than genuine hostility, you respond differently. When you understand that someone's withdrawal from a relationship is anxiety-driven rather than disinterest-driven, you position differently. When you understand that a colleague's opposition to your proposal is about perceived status threat rather than genuine disagreement with the logic, you address the actual problem, which is never the surface problem. This is what it means to understand human nature. not to manipulate people cruelly, but to see clearly what is actually driving behavior and respond to that, rather than to the performance. Quality 6. Calculated risk. Every significant move carries risk. The question is never, how do I eliminate risk? It's, does the asymmetry justify the move? Dangerously smart individuals are not reckless. They are precisely calibrated. They ask, what is the realistic downside? Can I survive it? What is the realistic upside? What conditions need to be in place before I move? This is the difference between gambling and investing. They both involve risk. One is driven by emotion and hope, the other by analysis and positioning. Quality 7. Silence and restraint. Information revealed is leverage surrendered. This is one of the cleanest formulas in social strategy. Every time you explain your reasoning unprompted, you give someone a map to counter you. Every time you share a vulnerability to appear relatable, you provide ammunition. Every time you speak to fill silence, you reveal discomfort that the other person did not need to know about. Silence is not emptiness. In the right context, it is the most communicative thing in the room. A pause before answering signals deliberateness. The absence of reaction to a provocation signals unshakability. The decision not to reveal a piece of information signals that you know its value. Train yourself to be comfortable in silence, to not fill gaps, to let others speak into the space you create. Because what they say when they're trying to fill silence will tell you everything. Quality 8. The keystone principle, self-control. Here it is. The one that holds everything together. Every other quality on this list. Emotional detachment, strategic patience, perception management, adaptability, human insight, calculated risk, silence. Every single one collapses without self-control as the foundation. Self-control is not willpower in the motivational poster sense. It is a cognitive architecture. It is the trained capacity to delay gratification, to subordinate impulse to strategy, to hold discomfort without reacting to it. Research in behavioral science, including longitudinal studies following Walter Mischel's foundational work on delayed gratification, has consistently shown that self-regulatory capacity predicts life outcomes across domains. Career success, financial stability, relational health, physical well-being. Not IQ, not talent, not privilege, self-regulation. Because here is the mechanism. Every time you act impulsively, you trade a long-term position for a short-term relief. You feel better for a moment, and you weaken your position permanently. Every time you exercise restraint, when you hold your tongue, hold your position, hold your action, you compound your advantage. Machiavelli's most dangerous prince is not the most ruthless or the most intelligent. It is the most disciplined. The one who can see an opportunity and wait for the right moment, who can be insulted and choose the time and terms of response, who can feel fear and project certainty, who can want something desperately and reveal nothing. Here is the step-by-step architecture of the self-control practice. Step 1. Create the gap. When a stimulus hits, anger, desire, fear, urgency, train yourself to pause. Even 2 seconds. That pause is where your agency lives. Step 2. Name the emotion. Cognitive labeling, backed by neuroscience research from UCLA's affect labeling studies, demonstrably reduces the emotional charge of an experience. I am feeling threatened is more manageable than unprocessed threat response flooding your system. Step 3. Ask the strategic question. Not, what do I feel like doing? What response best serves my position? This single reframe rewires the decision architecture over time. Step 4. Audit your reveals. At the end of each significant social interaction, assess. What did I give away? What did I learn? What did I conceal? This is not paranoia. This is calibration. Step 5. Build delayed gratification rituals. Small daily practices of choosing the harder, later reward over the easier, immediate one. This is not about deprivation. It is about building the neurological muscle that performs under pressure. Together, these 8 qualities form not a set of tricks, but a complete cognitive operating system. One that runs quietly, beneath the surface of social interaction, constantly observing, assessing, adapting, and positioning. This is what Machiavelli described and what modern behavioral science confirms. The most powerful individuals in any room are rarely the loudest, the most educated, or the most obviously impressive. They are the most controlled. You just covered the 8 qualities. You understand the framework. And you are still vulnerable. Here is why. Knowledge without implementation is just sophisticated helplessness. You can understand emotional detachment intellectually and still lose your composure in the next difficult conversation. You can know that silence is power and still fill every pause. You can recognize manipulation and still be susceptible to it. Because recognition is not the same as immunity. The gap between knowing and being is where most people live permanently. It is comfortable there, odd in the land of intellectual understanding without behavioral change. You can tell yourself you understand power while continuing to operate as though you don't. The next piece of this is harder. It involves understanding how these qualities are used against you, systematically, at a scale you are not currently prepared for. Social engineering, narrative construction, the specific manipulation frameworks used in high-stakes environments that most people encounter without ever having the vocabulary to identify what's happening. That is the next video. And if you think what you learned today was confronting, it was. But it was also the surface layer. The next level is not about building your intelligence. It is about identifying the predatory structures that have already been built around you, in your workplace, your social circles, possibly your closest relationships, and understanding exactly how they function and how to dismantle them. The end screen is live. Click it now, because the next move in this education is already waiting. And every hour you spend without this knowledge is an hour someone else is using it. The game doesn't pause. Neither should you.